What is happening, folks, and welcome back to another streaming of IJayReaction. We're gonna continue our streaming by watching another highly requested suggestion, which is gonna be a historical video. We are watching complete history of Sri Lanka. To be honest, I personally don't know much about Sri Lanka, and I think this video is gonna be super informative, and I'm so excited to check it out, guys. Well, Cobra, I wish you all the best with your lecture, and say hello to your doctor as well. Anubis, thank you for the suggestion. I will add that to my list. Alright guys, without further ado, let's start diving into this historical video. Here we go.
Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to discuss the history of Sri Lanka, an island nation located just south of India.
Okay.
This particular country holds a special place in my heart because I lived there for almost 10 years while working as a teacher at a not-for-profit vocational school. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the entire history of Sri Lanka, from the arrival of the first humans all the way to today. This will include a look at the family trees of several ruling dynasties. And please note that this video will be a bit longer than usual because I'm doing it as a fundraiser for Tea Leaf Trust, a charity operated by former colleagues and students of mine in the underprivileged tea growing areas of Sri Lanka. I'll be sharing more about the charity and my own experience in Sri Lanka at the end of the video.
After this
For now, here are two ways you can donate. The best way is to go to usefulcharts.com/donate. But if you'd rather stay on YouTube, you can also simply click the applaud button, as I'll be donating all of the income from this video to the charity as well.
So make sure to donate this video, guys. It is a charity video and it is historical.
Approximately 60,000 years ago, humans left Africa and slowly started to spread along the coast of Asia, all the way to Australia. At this point, the water level was lower, and Sri Lanka was connected to the continent via a land bridge, so no boats were necessary for humans to arrive there.
Okay.
In fact, the earliest skeletal remains of our species ever found in Asia, outside of the Middle East, were actually discovered in Sri Lanka. That specimen is known as Balangoda Man, and he is thought to have lived around 38,000 years ago. But let's zoom ahead to the year 3000 BCE, which is when the first human civilizations started to appear in places like Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley. At this point, the inhabitants of Sri Lanka were still living as hunter-gatherers, although there is some evidence of cereal cultivation and possibly even trade with Egypt. For the next 2,000 years, many urban civilizations would come and go in the Middle East. In North India, the Indus Valley civilization would eventually be replaced by Vedic culture. And in South India, a unique Dravidian culture emerged, which started to have contact with the inhabitants of Sri Lanka. We know this because during this period, South India and Sri Lanka shared the same pottery, customs, and even a proto-writing system. Some claim that these symbols represent a missing link between the earlier Indus Valley script and the later Brahmi script, but so far nothing conclusive can be said. Also, around this time, a famous story started to be told in North India, one that involved Sri Lanka. That story is the Ramayana, and it centers around four main characters: Rama, his wife Sita, his friend Hanuman, and Ravana, an evil demon king from Sri Lanka who kidnapped Sita. During my time in Sri Lanka, I actually lived very close to the spot where Sita was supposedly imprisoned, which is now marked by this Hindu temple. From an archaeological point of view, though, there is no evidence of any sizable kingdom in Sri Lanka during this time period, or any time earlier. However, it was around this time that a permanent settlement did start to emerge near what would eventually be called Anuradhapura. But like I said, the Ramayana is a product of Indian culture. One of the first major works of literature from the island of Sri Lanka itself is the Mahavamsa, composed by a Buddhist monk. It tells the story of how the Sinhalese people, currently the largest ethnic group on the island, came to live there. That story, which is a mix of legend and real history, begins around the year 600 BCE with an Indian princess named Supadevi from the kingdom of Vanga. She supposedly had a son with some sort of lion man named Sinha. That son was named Sinhabahu, and he went on to establish a city named Sinhapura, the exact location of which is unknown. The eldest son and heir of Sinhabahu was a prince named Vijaya. However, Vijaya was seen as unfit to rule and was expelled along with 700 of his followers. They left Sinhapura by boat and landed in, you guessed it, Sri Lanka. According to the Mahavamsa, this occurred on the exact same day that the Buddha died, which it calculates to have been in the year 543 BCE. As the legend goes, when the Buddha reached heaven, he asked the gods to protect Vijaya so that Buddhism could eventually flourish in Sri Lanka through Vijaya's descendants. Let's now switch to a map of Sri Lanka for the rest of the video. According to the Mahavamsa, Prince Vijaya landed near Mannar and called the island Tambapani, which is supported by the fact that the Greeks called Sri Lanka Taprobane. According to the Mahavamsa, when Prince Vijaya arrived, the island was inhabited by people called the Yakhas and Nagas. The Yakhas may have been the ancestors of the same indigenous tribe that still lives on the island today. These people are known as the Vedas, and their current population is around 3,000. The Nagas were probably South Indian traders who had migrated to Sri Lanka prior to Prince Vijaya. In any case, according to the Mahavamsa, Prince Vijaya and his followers ended up becoming the dominant group, establishing the kingdom of Tambapani. Very little is known of this early kingdom, though, and much of its history is thought to be primarily legend. What we do know is that a king named Pandukabaya, who was the grandson of Vijaya's nephew, eventually settled in Anuradhapura, which then became the capital of the Sinhalese kingdom for well over 1,000 years. Starting with Pandukabaya, the kingdom of Anuradhapura developed one of the most complex irrigation systems in the entire ancient world, one that was used and continuously expanded over the next 1,500 years and involved the construction of large artificial lakes. By the time we get to Pandakabaya's grandson, Devanampia Tissa, we have definitely moved from legend to verifiable history. This is because Devanampia Tissa reigned in Sri Lanka during the same time that the great Mauryan emperor Ashoka was reigning over most of India. It is said that Ashoka sent his firstborn son Mahinda to Sri Lanka, and it was Mahinda who introduced the island to Buddhism. A cutting from the tree under which the Buddha received enlightenment was brought to Sri Lanka around this time and planted in Anuradhapura. Today, the tree that grew from that cutting is the oldest human-planted tree for which we have a known planting date. During the reign of Devanampia Tissa, the first Buddhist temple was built in Sri Lanka. Note the dome-like structure in the middle, which is known as a stupa or dagaba. These are very common features in Buddhist architecture. They are built to contain a relic in the center and are used as a focus for meditation and for other rituals such as circling the relic in a clockwise direction. By this point, there were probably several Hindu temples on the island as well, particularly at key port cities such as Mantai and Trincomalee, where Tamil traders from South India were active. This includes the famous Konaswaram temple, dedicated to the god Shiva, which nowadays is the largest Hindu temple on the island. Devanampia Tissa was followed by several of his brothers, and during this time, two mini kingdoms developed south of the main kingdom, known as Kalania and Ruhuna. These were ruled by other members of the Sinhalese royal family. But meanwhile, the kingdom of Anuradhapura was coming under increasing pressure from invaders coming down from South India. This came to a head when a Tamil prince named Alalan from the Chola dynasty captured the throne. Interestingly, although Alalan was a foreign invader, the Mahavamsa paints him as a wise and just ruler. And generally speaking, he is seen as a positive figure by Sinhalese people today. However, he was eventually overthrown by a member of the Sinhalese dynasty named Dutugamunu. There is an interesting legend involving Dutagamunu's mother, Viharamahadevi. Her father was the Prince of Kalania, and he once put to death an innocent monk in a very cruel way. As the story goes, the gods punished him by causing a huge tsunami to flood the land. To appease the gods, he placed his daughter Viharamahadevi in a boat and sent her out to sea as a sacrifice. This calmed the sea, but unexpectedly, her boat came ashore in Ruhuna, where she ended up marrying the king there and giving...
Hold on a second. This story exists in so many other religions, and I am really impressed. That's the story of Moses. And even before that, it existed in the history of like the Elamites who were ruling in the border of the current Iran and Iraq. They also had the same story. It seems that religions are sharing the same stories over and over and over again to different people all around the world.
Birth to Duttugamuna. Duttugamuna is one of only two Sri Lankan kings to have earned the suffix the Great. Not only did he defeat Alalan and reclaim the kingdom of Anuradhapura, he also became the ruler of both Kalania and Ruhuna, thus becoming the first king to rule over the entire island. He is also remembered for building the Ruwanwalesia Stupa, which contains the largest collection of Buddha relics in the entire world. He was followed by his brother, and then by several nephews, until once again the kingdom came under the control of Tamil invaders. This time a series of rulers known as the Five Dravidians. At this point, I should probably explain some terminology. The two main ethnic groups in Sri Lanka today, as well as throughout all of Sri Lankan history, are the Sinhalese and the Tamils. The Tamils originate from South India, whereas the Sinhalese, according to the legend of Prince Vijaya, originate from North India, particularly from the area known as West Bengal. This is backed up by the fact that Tamil is a member of the Dravidian language family, found primarily in South India, whereas Sinhalese is a member of the Indo-Aryan language family, found in North India. Generally speaking, the other big difference is that Tamils are mostly Hindu, whereas the Sinhalese are mostly Buddhist. But according to genetic studies, the divide between the two groups is not necessarily as clear-cut as what some people think. As we'll see when we get to the recent history of Sri Lanka, the last 70 years or so have seen some very intense conflict between the Sinhalese and Tamils. Modern political rhetoric has thus led many to assume that the two ethnic groups have always been fierce enemies. But this is simply not the case. Throughout most of Sri Lankan history, Sinhalese people and Tamil people have lived together peacefully. And from what we know from recent genetic studies, it seems that they even intermarried quite a bit. Yes, there were times, such as during the period of the 5 Dravidians, where there were power struggles between Sinhalese rulers and Tamil rulers. But it's also important to keep in mind that most of the time, the two groups coexisted without conflict. In fact, Sinhalese kings often took wives from South India. I should point out that in South India, there were 3 main dynasties: the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Cheras. Alalin, who I mentioned earlier, was a Chola. However, the 5 Dravidians were Pandyas. At this point, let me remind you that this video is a fundraiser for Tea Leaf Trust, which, among many things, works to foster cooperation between the various ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. To donate now, you can click the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Or you can go to usefulcharts.com/donate. Finally, you can also simply click the applaud button and donate directly through YouTube. Let's now continue down the family tree chart. Valagamba, who had been deposed by the 5 Dravidians, eventually won back his kingdom. He went on to build the Abhayagiri Vihara, an important Buddhist monastery, as well as the Dambula Rock Temple, which includes some of the oldest painted ceilings in the world. Valagamba was followed by 2 of his sons, then a grandson, and then we get the first ruling queen in Sri Lankan history, Queen Anula. The Mahavamsa paints her in a very negative light, claiming that she poisoned at least 6 of her husbands. However, considering the fact that female rulers throughout world history are often portrayed by later chroniclers as villains, it's hard to know how much truth there is to that story. What we do know is that around the time that the Roman Empire was starting to dominate the Western world, the original line of Sinhalese kings came to an end, and a different Sinhalese dynasty rose up to take its place, known as the House of Lumbakarna. The first king from this family was Vasabha. He is credited with expanding the kingdom's large-scale irrigation system. But it is Vasabha's grandson, Gajabahu, who is the more famous king. Gajabahu came to the throne around the same time that the great Chola king Karakala was ruling in South India. There appears to have been some conflict between the 2 regions around this time, with Gajabahu successfully maintaining Sri Lankan independence. King Gajabahu also shows up as a character in the Tamil epic Silapatikaram, which centers around a woman named Kanaki, who is now worshipped as a goddess. Among the Sinhalese people, Kanaki is known as Patini, and ever since the time of King Gajabahu, she has been considered the patron deity of Sri Lanka. Gajabahu was succeeded by his father-in-law, who was also a Lumbakarna, and then by 9 of that king's descendants. We then get 3 members of the Lumbakarna dynasty who were not closely related to each other, before the throne finally settles on that 3rd branch, that of Gotabaya. Gotabaya was the father of Mahasena, another one of Sri Lanka's more well-known kings. Mahasena expanded the kingdom's irrigation system and built the Jetavana Ramya Stupa, Temple, which at the time of its construction was the 3rd tallest building in the world, surpassed only by the 2 tallest pyramids at Giza, Egypt. Originally, it was 400 feet high, but now it's only about 230 feet. Throughout this time, the kingdom of Anuradhapura was trading with the Romans, as evidenced by the many Roman coins found on the island that date to this period. It was also during the reign of Mahasena that the Mahavamsa, or Great Chronicle, was written. Going forward, most of Sri Lankan history is known from the Chulavamsa, or Lesser Chronicle, which were later additions made to the Mahavamsa. Anyway, Mahasena was followed by 7 of his descendants, after which Sri Lanka fell under the rule of invading Dravidians again. Which brings us to one of the most famous stories in Sri Lankan history, the story of Sigiriya, a huge rock that once housed an elaborate palace on top. The story starts with King Datasena, who expelled the Tamil rulers and re-established Sinhalese rule under a new house, the House of Maurya. He is remembered for commissioning this 43-foot-high statue of Buddha, carved out of granite. But he is remembered even more so for the conflict that arose between his 2 sons. His eldest was named Kashyapa,
that the statue
but
Kashyapa
epic. Was the son of a concubine, and therefore it was Moggallana, the son of the queen, who was the rightful heir to the throne. But before Moggallana could become king, Kashyapa stole the throne from his father and had his father killed by entombing him in a wall. He then went on to build Sigiriya, which, I've got to say, is the most amazing place I have ever visited in all my life.
Look at
Like I said, it's a huge rock in the middle of a large plain. To this day, you can still see the ruins of Kashyapa's palace on the top, and the entrance to the palace is still guarded by 2 large lion paws. The assumption is that there was originally a lion's head as well, but sadly, the head has been lost to time. On the sides of the rock are some unique works of art made using a fresco method, as well as a wall that was supposedly so polished that it acted as a mirror. Finally, surrounding the rock is an elaborate series of gardens and pools, which were originally all connected via some sort of ancient underground plumbing system. Anyway, Kashyapa's rule from this magnificent location eventually came to a bloody end. His brother, Moggallana, had escaped to South India, and several decades later, he amassed an army there and returned to Sri Lanka, where he defeated Kashyapa and claimed his throne. His descendants went on to rule the kingdom of Anuradhapura for the next 2 centuries, until the throne then passed back to the house of Lambakarna. During this period, Muslim traders arrived on the island and established a permanent presence. There is also evidence of trade with China by this point. However, in the year 1017, the mighty kingdom of Anuradhapura, which had existed for well over 1,000 years, finally came to an end. This was due to the rise of the greatest king in all of South Indian history, Raja Chola. During his reign, the Cholas not only conquered most of South India and Sri Lanka, they also controlled much of Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula as well. During the Chola period, the capital of Sri Lanka was permanently moved from Anuradhapura to a new location, a city called Polonnaruwa. Eventually, one of the descendants of the Sinhalese royal family, who had taken refuge in the south, a man named Vijayabahu, was able to capture Polonnaruwa from the Cholas and re-establish Sinhalese rule from the new capital. Thus began the...
This is a super informative video, and so far I've learned a lot. I didn't know much about Sri Lanka, guys, and it is sharing the history of Sri Lanka in details.
Start of Sri Lanka's second major kingdom, the kingdom of Polonnaruwa. But soon after the kingdom of Polonnaruwa was established, a conflict began between 2 branches of the Sinhalese royal family, the Kalingas and the Aryas. The Kalingas had intermarried with the Kalinga royal family from Andhra Pradesh, whereas the Arya branch had intermarried with Tamil royalty. Eventually, the Arya branch won out with the rise of Parakramabahu, the second of only 2 Sri Lankan kings who are regularly given the appellation the Great. Parakramabahu the Great was one of the last Sri Lankan kings to have a firm hold over the entire island. And during his reign, the famous irrigation system that had watered the island for over a millennia reached its most advanced level. If you visit Polonnaruwa today, you can still see the ruins of Parakramabahu's palace, his audience hall, and his swimming pool, not to mention the many religious monuments that were built during his lifetime.
It is impressive.
The greatest
that they
of
are
these
still
perhaps
remaining.
being the 3 giant Buddha statues at Gal Vihara, one sitting, one standing, and one resting. Parakramabahu is also notable for having captured a port city in India and for fighting a war in faraway Burma. After the death of Parakramabahu the Great, the Kalinga versus Arya conflict returned, and the throne jumped around between several different members of the royal family, including Parakramabahu's wife, Queen Lilavati. Another ruler worth noting from this period is Nisankamala. He is credited with commissioning this 26-foot-long stone tablet, which serves as an excellent example of the Middle Sinhalese script. Note that while the Sinhalese language is of northern Indian origin, the Sinhalese script is of southern Indian origin and has many similarities to the ancient Tamil script. The curvy nature of the modern Sinhalese script is a testament to the fact that it was originally written on leaves, not parchment. Curvy lines are less likely than straight lines to tear a hole in a leaf. By this point, you'll recognize a pattern that has repeated itself several times throughout Sri Lankan history. You get long periods of Sinhalese rule, but then eventually things decline, and a foreign invader from India ends up taking over for a time. In this case, the next big invader was a man named Kalinga Maga. But this time, the situation changed for good. So great was the destruction around Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa that most of the Sinhalese people, along with their royal family, migrated permanently to the south and western parts of the island, where they established a new kingdom at Dambadeniya. And the newcomers from India settled in the far north, establishing their new capital at Jaffna. Thus, there were now 2 independent kingdoms on the island, the Tamil-speaking kingdom of Jaffna in the north, and the Sinhalese-speaking kingdom of Dambadeniya in the south. The Jaffna kingdom eventually came under the rule of the house of Arya Chakravarti, and the Dambadeniya kingdom came under the rule of the house of Sirasangabo, which traced its origins to King Sirasangabo, who we saw earlier on the chart about 1,000 years back. The Dambadeniya kingdom was the less stable of the two. Because of internal conflict, the capital kept being moved until it finally ended up at Kotte, which is near Colombo, the current capital of Sri Lanka. It was around this time, in the early 1400s, that the famous Ming explorer Zheng He visited Sri Lanka, and a brief conflict ensued between China and Sri Lanka. During the mid-1400s, there was a brief period when the kingdom of Kotte came to rule the Jaffna kingdom. But then, in the early 1500s, 2 events occurred that severely weakened the Sinhalese kingdom. The first was the arrival of the Portuguese in 1505. They were the first European power to set foot on the island, which they called Ceylon. The second was an event in 1521, known as the Plunder of Vijayabahu. It is named after the king of Kotte at the time, Vijayabahu VII. Vijayabahu VII had 3 sons by his first wife. But then, after she died, he remarried and had a 4th son. When the 3 older brothers learned that the king planned to make his youngest son his heir, they plotted against their father, having him killed. They then divided the kingdom into 3 parts, each taking a part for themselves. By this point, a 4th Sinhalese kingdom had also arisen, called the Kingdom of Kandy, which was ruled by one of their more distant relatives. The division between the Sinhalese kingdoms made it easier for the Portuguese to gain a foothold on the island. They slowly took control over the coastal areas, converting many of the locals to Catholicism and playing the various Sinhalese kingdoms against each other. By 1597, they had conquered everything that had once been the Kingdom of Kotte, and in 1619, they conquered the Jaffna Kingdom as well, leaving the Kingdom of Kandy as the only local kingdom left on the island. For the next part of the video, I'm going to use my Asian royal family trees poster, which includes all of the various monarchs of the Kingdom of Kandy. If you want to buy a copy of this poster, you can find a link to it in the description. So here you can see King Vijayabahu VII and his 3 sons who split the Kingdom of Kotte, leading to its demise in 1597. But you can also see Sena Samata Wikramabahu from the same royal house, who became the first king of Kandy. His line ruled Kandy until his grandson Karaliada Bandara allied with the Portuguese and embraced Catholicism. This led Rajasingha I from the nearby kingdom of Sitawaka to attack Kandy. Karaliada Bandara died while trying to escape, leading the Portuguese to declare his daughter Kusumasana Devi the rightful monarch, giving her the Christian name Donna.
The word, I'm not sure about this candy, but the word candy in English comes from the Persian word kandi, which means sweet, and it became candy and it stayed like that. But still in Farsi, the word for sugar, apart from shekar, we have qand.
Katarina. But Rajasingha I managed to hold on to Kandy for over a decade, until a man named Vimala Dharma Surya took over. To solidify his rule, he married Kusumasana Devi. Like Kusumasana Devi, he too had converted to Catholicism. But at this point, they both renounced their conversion and returned to Buddhism. Vimala Dharma Surya is seen as the second founder of Kandy because he helped reestablish Buddhist institutions in Sri Lanka and managed to once again make Kandy independent. He is perhaps best remembered for bringing the Buddha's tooth to Kandy, where it remains to this day in the famous Temple of the Tooth. Throughout the entire history of Sri Lanka, that tooth was the most important Buddhist relic, and it was often moved from place to place whenever power shifted between kings. Anyhow, Vimala Dharma Surya was followed by his brother, Senarat, who married his widow, Kusumasana Devi. Kusumasana Devi and Senarat's son, Rajasingha II, then became the next king, ruling for 52 years. It was Rajasingha II who helped usher in the next era of Sri Lankan history. In an effort to get rid of the Portuguese, he allied with the Dutch, offering them a trade monopoly if they helped him to defeat the Portuguese.
The colonizers?
The Sinhalese have a saying for when something goes from bad to worse. They say it's like exchanging ginger for chili. Well, this saying is said to have originated in the fact that the Dutch ended up being worse for the country than the Portuguese. However, although the Dutch controlled most of Sri Lanka, which they called Ceylon, from 1640 to 1796, the Kingdom of Kandy did manage to maintain its independence throughout that entire time. Rajasingha II was followed by his son, and then a grandson. But that grandson failed to produce a legitimate heir. So upon his death, the throne passed to his brother-in-law, who was a Nayakar. The word Nayakar is a South Indian term meaning leader. And in this case, the Kandy Nayakars were the descendants of Telugu nobles who spoke Tamil. So, interestingly, the final 4 kings of the Sinhalese kingdom of Kandy were all Dravidian Hindus, although it should be noted that they were also strong supporters and patrons of Buddhism. This further illustrates the point I mentioned earlier about the various ethnic groups in Sri Lanka living together peacefully most of the time. So first came the Portuguese, then second the Dutch. Well, the third and final colonial power
British?
to take control of Sri Lanka
For sure.
was the British.
Yeah.
They defeated the Dutch in 1796, taking control of most of the island, which they,
I think this chapter is going to be the most interesting part of the history of Sri Lanka.
as I keep mentioning, called Ceylon. During the reign of King Sri Wikrama Rajasingha of Kandy, the British invaders fought several wars against the last remaining Sinhalese kingdom, and finally took control of it in 1815, becoming the first colonial power to rule over the entire island. The 19th century was, of course, the heyday of the British Empire, and Sri Lanka was just one small piece of that gigantic puzzle. During the middle part of the 1800s, British Ceylon became one of the largest exporters of coffee. However, in 1869, a devastating fungus spread across Asia, decimating all of the coffee plants. The plantations in Ceylon therefore turned their attention to the product, which, up until today, is the product Sri Lanka is most known for: tea.
Tea.
And this is finally where the charity I'm supporting today comes into the picture. You see, during the 19th century, the British brought thousands of low-paid workers over from South India to work on their tea plantations. In Sri Lanka today, the descendants of these people are known as Indian Tamils, in contrast to the Sri Lankan Tamils who have lived on the island since ancient times. Many of these Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka still work on tea plantations today and are among the lowest paid workers in the country. The Tea Leaf Trust runs educational programs throughout the tea growing areas of Sri Lanka, which helps give the young people there more opportunities. As someone who drinks a lot of tea, the Tea Leaf Trust is definitely a charity that I like to support. More on them in just a moment. But for now, let's return to the history of Sri Lanka and
during
finish
the time
story.
of the British.
If we zoom ahead to the end of World War II, we come to the period in which many British colonies around the world were achieving independence. For example, India got theirs in 1947, and Sri Lanka got theirs in 1948. But in 1948, Sri Lanka was not quite Sri Lanka yet. It was still called Ceylon, and it still had the British monarch as its head of state. That all changed in 1972, which is when the country officially changed its name from Ceylon to Sri Lanka and became, for the first time in its history, a republic. But by 1972, tension between the two main ethnic groups in Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese and the Tamils, was already high. During the 1950s, several laws were passed by the majority Sinhalese parliament that ended up putting Tamils at a severe disadvantage, such as one that made Sinhalese the only official language.
I believe this is the part that the British manipulation started. Because at that time, they started designing a new map for the entire world. They gave independence to Sri Lanka. In the south of India, they started creating Pakistan in the north of India. And they did a lot of changes. Ottoman Empire terminated at that time. So many new countries appeared, and that's what I'm personally thinking, guys. They designed the new map for the entire world in their own favor.
There were also major anti-Tamil riots in 1956,
Welcome, guys, to the
1958,
streaming.
1977, and 1981, in which hundreds of Tamils were killed. During the 1981 riot, the Jaffna Public Library, which had housed one of the largest collections of books and manuscripts in all of Asia, was burnt to a crisp.
Oh,
All of this
my
led to the
goodness.
emergence of several.
What a loss. What a disaster. Why did they burn this library?
One of the largest collections of books and manuscripts
made
in
me
all of
really
Asia
sad.
was burnt to a crisp. All of this led to the emergence of several Tamil separatist groups who wanted to create a country of their own in the north and east called Elam. Over time, the separatist group that came to dominate was the LTTE, also known as the Tamil
Liberation
Tigers.
Tigers of
In
Tamil
1983, they ambushed a Sri Lankan army patrol, killing 13 soldiers. The country responded with the largest anti-Tamil riots yet, an event known as Black July. The death toll was estimated to be in the thousands, with injuries and people left homeless numbering in the tens of thousands. Many Sri Lankan Tamils fled abroad at this point, with my country, Canada, actually being one of the top destinations.
Oh, he's Canadian.
Others joined the Tamil Tigers because, at this point, Sri Lanka had descended into a full-scale civil war, one that unfortunately lasted for 25 years, from 1983 to 2009. I won't go through all of the sad details, but let's just say that there was a lot of bloodshed on both sides, including several major assassinations by the Tamil Tigers, including that of Indian President Rajiv Gandhi and Sri Lankan President Ranasinghe Premadasa. The Tamil Tigers also became well known for using suicide bombers in civilian areas. For example, in 1996, they bombed the central bank in Colombo, killing 91 people and injuring 1,400, many of whom were left blind. It was just 2 years later, in 1998, that I arrived in Sri Lanka as a bright-eyed young teacher, fresh out of university. My ex-wife and I taught English for a full year in the town of Norelia in the tea-growing region. We decided to return to the country on a more permanent basis just a few years later, in 2002. By then, my firstborn son Moses, who, by the way, runs the YouTube channel Mo Gaming, was with us. And a few years later, my second son was born as well. He was born the year of the Asian tsunami. Anyway, with the help of a few friends, my ex-wife and I started a vocational school called Beacon Hill Academy, which operated for 13 years, 7 of which we served as teachers. We stayed in Sri Lanka until 2009 and were able to witness the end of the civil war in May of that year. It's now been 12 years since the end of that war. The current Prime Minister of Sri Lanka is the man who has dominated Sri Lankan politics for the last 15 years and who has built a cult of personality around himself, Mahinda Rajapaksa. And the current president is his brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So, yeah, Sri Lanka still has a way to go when it comes to being a full democracy. However, since the end of the war, the country has made some enormous strides in terms of increasing its score on the Human Development Index and boosting its economy via mega projects like the Lotus Tower and Colombo's new port. So that was a look at the entire history of Sri Lanka from 38,000 years ago to today. And now I want to share with you a bit more about the charity I'm supporting by doing this video. Like I said, I lived in Sri Lanka for almost 10 years, and I even helped start a school there in the tea-growing region. Well, the school that I worked at no longer exists. However, several of my former colleagues and students are carrying on its mission through another school known as Tea Leaf Vision, which is funded primarily by the UK charity Tea Leaf Trust. For the rest of this video, I'm going to play a short film produced by them that explains what they're all about. If you like what you see, I encourage you to donate by going to usefulcharts.com/donate or by clicking the applaud button. Like I said, all the proceeds from this video will be going to them.
I'll watch the video till the end, guys. Maskelia.
Sri Lanka's hill country is home to Sri Lanka's tea industry. Tea is grown and picked by hand on an industrial scale. It's a major export for Sri Lanka and accounts for around 15% of GDP, generating roughly $700 million annually. But the people who grow and pick the tea are the poorest and most underprivileged class in Sri Lankan society.
That is so sad.
Crushing poverty and limited access to good quality education ensures there is always another generation of undereducated youth who will be forced to fulfill the tea estate's needs for cheap manual labourers. Tea Leaf Vision is working hard to try and change this. They believe that the only way to help the next generation escape the low wages and back-breaking work is through education and personal development. Tea Leaf Vision runs an intensive one-year full-time diploma programme for students aged between 18 to 24 years old. This free course teaches English grammar and speech, IT, business studies, and personal development. The diploma is designed to help young adults who've had to leave education due to poverty or have been let down by an under-resourced state school system. For many of the schools in the plantation area, teaching standards tend to be very poor as a result of the employment of unqualified staff. This leads to many school leavers not achieving the academic results required to find meaningful employment or continue higher-level studies.
I think that Tea Leaf Vision is different than Sri Lankan government schools because it's based on the notion of encouragement and the notion of potential and the notion that just because these students have failed at Sri Lankan government school doesn't mean they're failures, and just because the education system has failed them doesn't mean that they have to give up and just accept their lot in life.
Hey Rahman,
and
welcome to the
Vision,
streaming.
through helping them to find their potential, through encouraging them, through kindness, actually allows them to become complete individuals and self-confident individuals and individuals capable of achieving their goals.
Before I came to the television, I couldn't speak in English. But once I came to television, now I finished 11-month course and now I can speak in English nicely.
That's impressive.
I studied government school. That moment, they didn't teach English. If they teach one day, next day they are not going to teach. Like that they are teaching. Because of that, we didn't improve a lot English.
After my A-levels, I couldn't get good results. I thought I am stupid and I can't study well like that. Once I came here, I did all the things successfully and I got good marks. So I'm proud of myself and television.
Hats off to you guys.
Here we are teaching the important thing. That's everything important in our life. But the thing is, which we need if we are going to for employability in Sri
Here
Lanka.
is
What are the things that
1:22
we need?
a.m.
We are
It's
not
pretty
going-
late.
We are not learning in government school, but we are learning here. And that is the main purpose here. And we are trying to change their life.
Tea Leaf Vision provides a supportive environment where only English is spoken by all the staff and students 100% of the time. This is done to accelerate the learning process, but can be daunting at first to new pupils.
Before I came to television, I couldn't understand anything. But nowadays, I can answer to your questions also. So I can.
They have improved
I have
a lot.
confidence too. I can.
They're speaking proper English.
If I ask any English questions, I can answer in front of you.
As part of the course and the school ethos of giving back to their communities, students are trained throughout the year and monitored by teaching staff to give a basic English programme to 7 to 12-year-olds once a week at remote primary schools serving tea estates. The students go out to teach during terms 2 and 3.
One of the main area that television support is how these youth can, in return, contribute to their community, to contribute to the development of their own brothers and sisters.
The course has been designed to instill in students the importance of community service and boost their personal confidence, while simultaneously providing free English lessons to hundreds of children who would not otherwise have access to English classes.
Through the course, it's amazing because they go from being nothing within their communities to being change agents, being role models to the young men and women in their communities, saying, yeah, this time last year
This
I couldn't speak
educational
English either,
system
and now I'm
is
teaching
doing
you.
a great job, and it's changing the future of those kids. Well guys, this became a really long video, but I wanted to know the history of Sri Lanka, and this was truly an epic and informative video, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching it. If you enjoyed watching the video just like I did, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, and if you are new to my channel, do me a huge favor and hit the subscribe button. I still have a couple of more videos to watch with you during this streaming session, and stay tuned. I'll be back in a couple of seconds, and we're gonna continue watching our videos together. Peace.